She thought she was inheriting a worthless piece of land and a falling-down barn. What she found inside would rewrite her entire past. If you've ever felt like you were starting over with nothing, maybe you should stick around and listen. Hit that subscribe button if you feel me, because this story is for you. The bus ticket was a thin, flimsy piece of paper, but it felt like a lead weight in my pocket. It was my 18th birthday, my official release date from the state system, and my entire worldly possessions were crammed into a single black duffel bag at my feet. 2 years in the group home, 3 years before that in a series of foster placements that blurred into a single, gray memory of strange kitchens and borrowed bedrooms. Freedom was supposed to feel light. It didn't. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, with no idea how far the drop was. The bus groaned its way out of the city, leaving the familiar grid of concrete and noise behind. I watched the skyscrapers shrink in the grimy window until they were just jagged teeth on the horizon. My reflection stared back, a pale, tired-looking girl with eyes that looked older than 18. For 2 years, every decision had been made for me. Wake up at 6, lights out at 10. School, chores, therapy sessions, all on a schedule I didn't create. Now, the only schedule was the one printed on the bus ticket, and it ended in a town I'd never heard of, Havenwood. The letter that sent me here was tucked inside my jacket. It had arrived a week ago, a crisp cream envelope with a lawyer's letterhead, a stark contrast to the usual government-issue brown envelopes that defined my life. It was from a man named Arthur Abernathy, attorney at law. He wrote that my maternal grandfather, Silas Miller, had passed away 6 months prior. I was his sole heir. The words felt alien. I hadn't seen my grandfather since I was 5 years old, right before my mother died and my world fell apart. The system had told me he wasn't a suitable guardian. Unstable, they said. A recluse. I had spent 13 years believing I had no one. The bus ride was 4 hours of watching the world change from urban sprawl to flat, empty farmland. The sky was a low, bruised purple, threatening rain that never quite fell. Each mile marker felt like a tick of a clock counting down to a future I couldn't picture. What does a person inherit from a ghost? A box of old photographs? A rusty pocket knife? I expected nothing, which felt safer than hoping for something. Hope was a dangerous thing in the system. It was the first thing they taught you to let go of. Havenwood wasn't so much a town as a place the road passed through on its way to somewhere else. A single main street with a blinking traffic light, a gas station with peeling paint, a diner, and a few storefronts with dusty windows. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a small building that served as the station and post office. I was the only one who got off. The driver gave me a look that was half pity, half curiosity before pulling away, leaving me alone with my duffel bag in the sudden, heavy silence. The lawyer's office was 2 doors down, above a hardware store. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each step echoing in the quiet hall. The name on the door was printed in faded gold leaf, A. Abernathy. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of old paper and floor polish, and pushed it open. The man behind the massive oak desk looked up over a pair of reading glasses. He was older, with a fringe of white hair and a face etched with the kind of tired lines that come from listening to other people's problems for a living. His office was a testament to a long career. Shelves overflowed with thick, leather-bound books, and stacks of files threatened to avalanche onto the floor. It was cluttered but clean, a place of organized chaos. "Miss Miller?" he asked. His voice was dry, like rustling leaves. I nodded, my own voice caught in my throat. "Arthur Abernathy, please, have a seat." He gestured to a worn leather chair that sighed as I sat down. "I trust your journey was uneventful." "It was fine," I managed. He folded his hands on the desk, his gaze direct but not unkind. "Well, let's get to it. Your grandfather, Silas, was a client of mine for many years. A very particular man. He didn't have much, but what he had, he wanted you to have. His will is straightforward. He leaves you his property, free and clear. Or, almost. He slid a file across the desk. I opened it. Inside were legal documents, a deed, and a tax statement with a figure circled in red. $3,240. There are some back taxes owed, Mr. Abernathy explained, his tone carefully neutral. The property isn't much. A small parcel of land just outside of town, about 5 acres. And a barn. The farmhouse burned down decades ago, before Silas even bought the place. A barn. I was the proud owner of a falling down barn and a 4-figure tax bill. The familiar, cold feeling of disappointment settled in my stomach. It was exactly what I had expected. Nothing. Less than nothing, actually. A debt. Most people in town thought your grandfather was eccentric, he continued, choosing his words with professional care. He kept to himself, didn't trust banks, didn't trust the government, lived a simple life. He paused, looking at me as if trying to gauge my reaction. There is another option. A development company, Pioneer Holdings, has been trying to buy up land in this area for a new residential project. They made an offer on Silas's property a few months ago. It's a standing offer, $5,000. He let that hang in the air, $5,000. After the taxes, it would leave me with a little under $1,800, enough for a deposit on a cheap apartment somewhere, a few weeks of groceries, a start. It was the sensible choice, the only choice, really. They'll take the land, clear the debt, and you walk away with a check, he said. It's clean, simple. I looked down at the papers in my lap. My grandfather's name, Silas Miller, was scrawled at the bottom of the deed in a shaky but determined hand. The only family I had left, and his entire legacy was a problem I could sell for $1,800. It felt like a betrayal, even though I barely knew him. The social workers had painted him as a ghost who couldn't be bothered with a granddaughter. But he had left me something. He had remembered me. What do they want the land for? I asked, my voice quiet. Mr. Abernathy shrugged. It's adjacent to a larger parcel they already own. They need it for road access, I believe. It's worthless to anyone but them, frankly. The barn is a teardown, the land is overgrown. No one has farmed it in 50 years. He was waiting for me to take the easy way out. Everyone in my life had always expected me to take the easy way out. The path of least resistance. It was simpler for everyone. I'd like to see it first, I said. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Of course, it's your property. Or it will be once we file the paperwork. The county requires a $10 filing fee to transfer the deed into your name. A formality. $10. He pushed a pen toward me. Sign here and here. I signed the documents, my hand feeling strangely steady. I counted out a crumpled $10 bill from my wallet, the last of my cash until my final check from the state cleared. I slid it across the desk. He took it, and for a second, I saw a look on his face that wasn't pity. It was something closer to respect. Or maybe I was just imagining it. The property is about 2 miles east of town, he said, drawing a small, simple map on a notepad. Follow the main road, it turns to dirt. You can't miss it. The only structure for miles. He handed me a single, old-fashioned iron key. It was heavy and cold in my palm. This is for the padlock on the main doors. Silas was always very particular about his locks. I stood up, the leather chair groaning in protest. I tucked the file and the key into my bag. Miss Miller, he said as I reached the door. I turned. Your grandfather, he talked about you sometimes. He was very proud of you. The words hit me harder than the tax bill. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and walked out, the bell on his door chiming softly behind me. The walk out of town was quiet. The promised rain had started, a fine, misty drizzle that clung to my hair and jacket. It wasn't cold, just damp, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones. The paved road gave way to a packed dirt lane. just as the lawyer had said. The world grew wilder here. The neat fences of the town disappeared, replaced by tangled thickets of blackberry bushes and towering pine trees that crowded the edges of the road. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, a clean, sharp scent that was a world away from the city's exhaust fumes. I walked for what felt like an hour, my duffel bag growing heavier with each step. There was no sign of civilization, just the road and the woods and the oppressive gray sky. I was starting to think I was lost when I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, a dark shape loomed against the skyline. The barn. It stood alone in a clearing, a massive, hulking structure of weathered gray wood. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back, and several of the planks on its sides were missing, leaving dark, gaping holes. The land around it was a sea of waist-high weeds and wildflowers gone to seed. It looked less like a building and more like a monument to decay, something the earth was slowly, patiently reclaiming. This was it, my inheritance. I pushed through the tall, wet grass, my jeans soaked in seconds. As I got closer, the scale of it became more apparent. It was bigger than I'd imagined, long and tall, with a cavernous main door secured by a thick chain and a rusty padlock. This had to be the one the key was for. The silence was absolute, broken only by the dripping of rain from the eaves and the rustle of wind through the tall grass. It felt like a place forgotten by the world. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. The laughter from the title wasn't a real sound. It was the feeling I got standing there. The townspeople, the developers, even the lawyer, they all saw this as a joke. A $10 joke. A worthless ruin left by a crazy old man to a granddaughter he'd never known. And maybe they were right. The smart thing to do would be to turn around, walk back to town, call Mr. Abernathy, and tell him to sell. Take the money and run, never look back. But I couldn't. Something held me there. This was the last piece of him. The last piece of my family. Selling it felt like selling his memory, and it was the only one I had. I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It felt ancient, a relic from another time. The padlock was stiff with rust, but after a moment of jiggling and forcing it, the key turned with a loud, grating click. The lock sprang open. I unhooked the heavy chain, its links clanking against the wood. The double doors were massive, and it took all my weight to push one of them open. It moved with a deep, groaning shudder, scraping against the floor inside. I stepped across the threshold, out of the rain and into the gloom. The air inside was thick with the smell of old hay, damp earth, and time. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that pierced the gloom from holes in the roof. The interior was vast, a cathedral of shadows. The main floor was empty except for piles of debris, rotting canvas tarps, and a few pieces of old, rusted farm equipment that looked like sleeping iron dinosaurs. To one side, a series of empty animal stalls stood like silent sentinels. A wooden ladder led up to a hayloft that was shrouded in darkness. It was a wreck, an empty, decaying shell. But it was my wreck. I dropped my duffel bag near the door and began to walk the space, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. I ran my hand along the rough-hewn wood of the support beams. They were thick and solid, made from trees that must have been ancient when they were felled. Despite the decay, the bones of the place were strong. Silas had lived his life here, or at least spent his time here. What had he done in this huge, empty space? My goal was simple: find anything worth keeping, anything that told me who he was, and maybe find a reason to justify not selling this place to the first person with a checkbook. I started methodically, in one corner. There wasn't much, old tools mostly. Handsaws with rusted teeth, hammers with cracked wooden handles, a collection of glass jars filled with screws and nails sorted by size. He was organized, at least. In a stack of old newspapers used to cover a workbench, I found a date, 10 years ago. He'd been here, working, a decade ago. The workbench was tucked away in a back corner, under the hayloft. It was cluttered, but sturdy. Vices were bolted to its edge, and the wood was scarred with countless cuts, burns, and oil stains. This was where he worked. I pulled at the drawers. 2 of them opened easily, filled with more tools and bits of hardware. The third, a wide, flat drawer in the center, was locked. There was no keyhole, just a smooth front. I pulled, I pushed. I tried to pry it open with a screwdriver, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, I slammed my hand on the top of the bench. A small, wooden box I hadn't noticed, tucked behind a stack of oil cans, fell to the floor and broke open. Inside wasn't treasure, just a handful of bent nails and a single, small, brass key. It was too small for a door. I looked back at the locked drawer. On the underside of the workbench, almost completely hidden in shadow, was a tiny, recessed keyhole. My fingers trembled slightly as I fit the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, silently. The drawer clicked open. I slid it out. It wasn't filled with tools. It held just 2 items. The first was a set of 4 heavy, ornate iron keys, looped together on a metal ring. They looked like something from a medieval castle. The second was a single sheet of yellowed paper, folded into a neat square. I carefully unfolded it. It was a map. A hand-drawn floor plan of the barn. It was meticulously detailed, with measurements and notes written in a cramped, precise script. My grandfather's handwriting. He'd marked the support beams, the location of the stalls, the ladder to the loft. And on the main floor, in the very center of the large open space, was a small, neatly drawn X. Next to it, he'd written one word: begin. I looked from the map to the center of the barn floor. It was just dirt and scattered straw, like the rest of it. What was I supposed to begin? I walked to the spot, my boots crunching on the debris. I kicked at the ground. Nothing. I got on my hands and knees, brushing away the loose dirt and straw. The floor beneath wasn't just earth. It was made of thick, wide wooden planks, covered by a century of grime. I swept a larger area with my hands, my heart starting to beat a little faster. And then I saw it. A faint line in the dirt. And another. A perfect square, about 4 feet by 4 feet. The planks inside the square ran in a different direction from the ones outside it. It was a door. A trapdoor, so perfectly fitted and covered with debris that it was nearly invisible. There was no handle, no ring to pull. I used the screwdriver from the workbench, forcing the tip into the seam and prying upwards. The wood groaned in protest. It was heavy. I strained, putting all my weight into it, until finally, with a loud crack, it lifted a few inches. I dropped the tool and got my fingers underneath, pulling with all my strength. The door swung up on hidden, well-oiled hinges, revealing a dark, square opening in the floor. A wave of cool, dry air washed over my face, smelling of cellared earth and stone. It wasn't a damp or musty smell, it was clean. I leaned over the edge. A set of steep wooden steps led down into blackness. My hands were shaking now. This was more than just a root cellar. The care with which it was hidden, the map, the key, it was all deliberate. My grandfather had left me a trail. I found an old lantern on the workbench, a battery-powered one, thankfully. I clicked it on. The beam was weak but steady. Taking a deep breath, I swung my legs into the opening and started down the stairs. The steps were solid under my feet. 10 steps down, and I was in a small, stone-lined room. It was about 10 feet square, with a low ceiling I could almost touch. The air was still and cool. And it was completely dry. The stonework was precise, the mortar clean. This wasn't some old farm cellar, it was carefully constructed. And in the center of the room, sitting directly on the stone floor, was a single, dark green, military-style footlocker. It was the only thing in the room. It was heavy, made of thick steel. I couldn't lift it, so I had to push it, inch by inch, toward the stairs. Getting it up was a struggle. I half lifted, half dragged it up each step, my muscles screaming in protest. Finally, sweating and breathing hard, I hauled it out onto the barn floor and slammed the trapdoor shut. I sat on the floor next to it, my heart pounding in my chest, and aimed the lantern beam at the front. It was secured with a heavy-duty combination lock. 4 digits. It could be any one of 10,000 combinations. It was hopeless. I slumped against the box in defeat. What was I thinking? That I'd find some hidden treasure that would solve all my problems. Life wasn't a movie. This was probably just filled with more of his old junk he didn't want anyone to steal. I sat there in the quiet gloom of the barn for a long time, the lantern beam making the shadows dance. My mind drifted back. I tried to conjure a memory of him, a real one, not the faded photograph I kept in my wallet. I remembered a summer day, a picnic. I couldn't have been more than 4. He was pushing me on a swing, and he was singing a silly, off-key song. And he was teaching me something, a date. "Never forget this date, Ilara," he'd said, his voice warm and kind. "It's the most important date in the world. It's the day I married your grandma. 0814. August 14th. My breath hitched. 0814. I scrambled over to the lock, my fingers fumbling with the dials. I lined them up. 0814. I pulled on the shackle. It clicked open. For a moment, I just stared at it. He had left me the key. He had left me the map. And he had left me the combination, all those years ago, planted like a seed in a memory I didn't even know I had. With trembling hands, I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. I aimed the lantern inside. My eyes adjusted to the light, and my heart sank. It wasn't gold. It wasn't cash. It was paper, stacks and stacks of it. Bundles of letters tied neatly with twine. On top of the first bundle was a single, sealed envelope, with my name written on it in that same, precise script. Ilara. Beneath the letters was a thick, leather-bound photo album and a small velvet pouch. I opened the pouch first. A delicate silver locket on a fine chain fell into my palm. It was tarnished with age. I clicked it open. On one side was a tiny, faded picture of a beautiful young woman with my eyes, my mother. On the other side was a picture of my grandfather, younger, smiling, his arm around her. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, washed over me. I hadn't seen a picture of my mother in years. The foster system had a way of losing things like that. I closed my hand around the locket, the cool metal a comfort against my skin. Then I picked up the letter. My letter. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely break the seal. I unfolded the pages and began to read. "My dearest Ilara," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you have found your way home. I am sorry. I am so sorry for so many things. I am sorry I wasn't there to watch you grow up. I am sorry you have spent your life believing you were alone. You were never alone. Not for 1 second. The words blurred through my tears. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and kept reading. They told you I abandoned you. They told you I was unfit, that I didn't want you. That is the greatest lie of my life, and the one that has caused me the most pain. The truth is, I spent every day of the last 13 years trying to protect you. The world is not as simple as they make it seem. Your mother, she fell in love with a dangerous man. Your father, he wasn't just a bad man, Ilara. He was part of something rotten, a criminal network that dealt in fear and exploitation. When she tried to leave him, to take you and run, he wouldn't let her go. Her death was not an accident. He made it look like one, but I know the truth. I had to stop. I put the letter down, my whole body trembling. My mother's death. I'd always been told it was a car accident. A tragic, random event. The words on the page felt like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. The story of my life, the one that had been carefully constructed for me by caseworkers and therapists, was a lie. I picked up the letter again, my need to know overpowering the pain. I tried to get custody of you. I fought for you. But they had money and influence. They painted me as an unstable old man, a grieving father losing his mind. They threatened me. They made it clear that if I didn't back off, what happened to your mother would happen to you. So I did the only thing I could. I disappeared. I let them think they'd won. I let the world think I was a crazy recluse in a falling down barn. Because as long as they thought I was irrelevant, they would leave you alone. They wouldn't see you as a threat. My abandonment was a shield, Alara. The most painful thing I have ever done, but I would do it again 1,000 times to keep you safe. I broke down. I sat on the dusty floor of that cold barn and cried. I cried for the little girl who thought her grandfather didn't want her. I cried for the mother I never knew, and for the violent way she was taken. And I cried for the old man, who had lived out his last years in this lonely place, carrying the weight of that terrible secret, all to protect a granddaughter he could only love from a distance. The barn didn't feel like a wreck anymore. It felt like a sanctuary, a fortress built of sacrifice. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the tears subsided, replaced by a cold, hard anger. Anger at my father. Anger at the system that had failed us so completely. Anger at the lies that had shaped my entire existence. I stayed in the barn that night. I had nowhere else to go, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be anywhere else. I ate the protein bars from my bag for dinner and huddled in my jacket for warmth as the temperature dropped. I read more of the letters. They were journals, really. His thoughts, his memories of my mother, his pain, his hope for my future. He wrote about watching me from a distance, hiring a private investigator once a year just to get a photograph of me, to know I was okay. He knew which foster home I was in, what school I went to. He was a ghost in my life, always present, always unseen. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. My grandfather had given me the truth. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I spent the day going through the rest of the footlocker. Beneath the letters and the photo album was a false bottom. Underneath it, I found a smaller, metal document box. It was also locked, but one of the iron keys from the workbench drawer fit it perfectly. Inside was the real reason for his isolation. It was evidence, stacks of it. Financial ledgers detailing money laundering schemes. Photographs of my father with men in expensive suits. Cassette tapes of recorded conversations. And dozens of documents related to a company called Pioneer Holdings. It all clicked into place. The development company that wanted this land. They weren't just developers. They were the modern face of my father's criminal enterprise. They hadn't just been trying to buy up land. They had been harassing my grandfather for years, trying to force him out. They must have suspected he knew something, that he had evidence. This land, this barn, it wasn't about road access. It was about destroying whatever proof he had against them. Tucked at the very bottom of the box was one last letter. Alara, it read, you now hold my life's work. With this, you have a choice. It is a choice I cannot make for you. In the west wall of the barn, behind the third support beam, there is a loose plank. Behind it, you will find all the money I ever saved. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough for you to disappear, to change your name, go somewhere new, and build a life for yourself, free from all of this. It is the safe choice. It is the life of peace I always wanted for you. He continued, or you can take this box to the authorities. The evidence is all there. It's enough to bring them down, to get justice for your mother, to clear my name. But they will fight back. They are dangerous people. It will not be an easy path. It may not be a safe one. I am giving you the choice I never had, to run and be safe or to stay and fight. Whatever you decide, Know that I love you, and I am proud of the woman you have become. Your loving grandfather, Silas. I sat there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. He was offering me an escape, a clean break. The $1,800 from the land sale was a joke compared to this. I could take his savings and vanish. No one would ever know. I could be anonymous, safe. Everything I had ever thought I wanted. But as I looked around the barn, at the dusty tools and the sturdy beams, I knew I couldn't. Running would mean letting them win. It would mean my mother's death was for nothing. It would mean my grandfather's lonely sacrifice was for nothing. His whole life had been a fight, quiet and hidden, but a fight nonetheless. He hadn't passed me a burden. He had passed me a torch. Just then, I heard the sound of a vehicle coming up the dirt road. I quickly shoved the box back into the footlocker and hid it under a pile of old tarps. I peered out through a crack in the wall. A sleek black sedan was parking near the entrance to the property. A man in a suit got out. He looked completely out of place in the overgrown wilderness. He carried a briefcase and walked toward the barn with an air of impatient authority. He didn't bother to knock. He just pushed the door open further and stepped inside, his expensive shoes crunching on the debris. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the space. He saw me standing in the shadows. "Ah, you must be the granddaughter, Elara Miller." I didn't answer. "I'm from Pioneer Holdings," he said, pulling a business card from his jacket. "We have a standing offer on this property. I've been authorized to increase it substantially. $20,000. Cash. We clear the tax debt. You walk away with a very nice nest egg." He smiled, a practiced, predatory smile. He thought he was talking to a scared kid who could be bought. He had no idea who he was talking to. He had no idea what I was standing on. "The offer is good for 24 hours, he said, his tone shifting, a hint of steel beneath the surface. "This place is a liability. A strong wind could bring it down. You wouldn't want to be here when that happens. It would be a tragedy." It was a threat, wrapped in a thin veil of concern. They were getting nervous. They knew the property had transferred to me. They didn't know what, if anything, I had found. They were trying to flush me out. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He nodded, the smile returning. "A wise decision. I'll leave you my card." He placed it on a nearby crate and left, his car kicking up gravel as he drove away. The moment he was gone, my resolve hardened into something unbreakable. There was no choice. There was only one path forward. I found the loose plank in the west wall, just as Silas had described. Behind it was a small, metal safe box. Inside, there were bundles of cash. I didn't count it all, but it looked like tens of thousands of dollars. His life savings. The escape he had built for me. I took out $5,000. The rest, I left in the wall. I packed the document box of evidence into my duffel bag. It was heavy, the physical weight of my grandfather's fight. I put on my jacket, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked out of the barn, pulling the heavy doors shut behind me. I didn't lock it. It was my home now. I would be back. The 2-mile walk back to town felt different this time. I wasn't a lost girl anymore. I was a daughter and a granddaughter. I had a history. I had a purpose. I walked straight into Mr. Abernathy's office without knocking. He looked up, surprised to see me again so soon. "Miss Miller, have you made a decision about the Pioneer offer?" "I have," I said. I swung the duffel bag onto his desk. It landed with a heavy thud. I unzipped it and pulled out the metal box. "But first, I think you need to see this." I spent the next 2 hours in his office. I told him everything. I showed him the letters, the ledgers, the photos. We listened to one of the cassette tapes on an old player he had in a closet. The voice of my father, cold and cruel, filled the dusty office. Mr. Abernathy sat there, his face growing paler and paler, his professional demeanor crumbling away to reveal the horrified, compassionate man beneath. When I was finished, he was silent for a long time. He just stared at the box on his desk. "Silas," he finally whispered. "That stubborn old fool. He was a hero." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new, profound respect. "Your grandfather was the bravest man I have ever known." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the quiet street. "Pioneer Holdings has been bullying this town for years, pushing people out, buying land for pennies on the dollar. We all knew something was wrong, but we didn't have proof." He turned back to me. "This changes everything." "What do we do?" I asked. "We don't go to the local police," he said immediately. "This company has deep roots. We go to the state, to the Attorney General's office. This is bigger than Havenwood. This is racketeering, conspiracy, murder." He looked down at the evidence, then back at me. "Are you sure you want to do this, Alara? Once we start this fire, there's no putting it out. They will come after you." "They've been after my family my whole life," I said. "It's time we started fighting back." A slow smile spread across his face. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. Mr. Abernathy was true to his word. He connected us with a state prosecutor, a tough, no-nonsense woman who took one look at the evidence and immediately launched a full-scale investigation. There were depositions, interviews, threats from Pioneer's high-priced lawyers. They tried to paint me as a delusional, greedy teenager, inventing a conspiracy to extort money. But the evidence was undeniable. The ledgers, the tapes, my grandfather's meticulous records. They told a story that couldn't be refuted. I used the money from the wall to pay the back taxes on the barn. I hired a local contractor, a man named George who had known my grandfather vaguely and always thought he was a decent, quiet fella. When I told him I wanted to fix the place up, not tear it down, he gave me a long, searching look and then quoted me a price that was far too fair. Word got around town. The story of what was happening with Pioneer Holdings, the truth about old Silas Miller. People started looking at me differently. I wasn't just some kid from the system anymore. I was Silas's granddaughter. The woman at the hardware store started giving me discounts. The owner of the diner always made sure my coffee cup was full. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was a quiet, small-town acceptance. A sense of belonging I had never experienced before. Slowly, methodically, the barn began to change. George and his crew replaced the rotten planks, patched the holes, and put a new, sturdy roof on the whole structure. I worked alongside them, sweeping out the decades of dust, cleaning the old tools, learning how to measure twice and cut once. The physical labor was grounding. With every nail I hammered, it felt like I was rebuilding not just a building, but my own life. The day the indictments came down was a gray, overcast Tuesday. Mr. Abernathy called me. The state had arrested a dozen people, including the CEO of Pioneer Holdings and several of his associates. My father was already in prison on unrelated charges, but this new evidence would ensure he would never get out. Justice, after all these years. It didn't bring my mother back. It didn't erase the 13 years of loneliness. But it was something. It was the end of their story and the beginning of mine. Months turned into a year. The barn was no longer a ruin. The main floor was a wide open living space, with a small kitchen I'd installed in one corner and a loft for sleeping that George had built for me. I kept my grandfather's workbench right where it was, a memorial to him. The land outside, once choked with weeds, was now a sprawling garden. I wasn't a farmer, but I was learning. I never touched the rest of the money in the wall. It was my grandfather's gift, an escape hatch I had chosen not to take. It felt more valuable sitting there, a symbol of my choice, than it ever would in a bank account. One evening, I was sitting on the newly built porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The barn stood strong and proud behind me, a silhouette against the fading light. It was quiet, the kind of deep, peaceful silence I had come to cherish. I was holding the silver locket in my hand, its surface now polished and bright. I had come here with nothing but a duffel bag and a ghost story. I thought my inheritance was a debt and a pile of rotting wood. But my grandfather had left me so much more. He left me the truth. He left me a home. And he left me a choice. He taught me that inheritance isn't about what you're given, it's about what you choose to do with it. Home isn't a place you find, it's a place you build, a place you fight for. And as I sat there, in the home my grandfather had protected and I had reclaimed, I finally felt free. The weight was gone. The cliff edge I had been standing on had transformed into solid ground. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. My story is about finding a home in the most unexpected of places, about uncovering truths that change everything. But really, it's about the fact that you are stronger than the stories people tell about you. You have the power to pick up the broken pieces of your past and build something new, something that is truly yours. Have you ever had a moment that redefined your entire life? A discovery that changed your past and set you on a new future? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. This channel is a community for people who understand that sometimes the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. They're the stories we fight to reclaim. Subscribe if you believe in second chances, and thank you for being a part of this one.